Last point is a question in a round, actually. Lots of things that we're talking about, a lot of the challenges, the answer is always, or the question is, where's the capital coming from? And that would be my question, actually. But if you see where the world economies are going, if you look at the interest rates right now, credit is very high. 10-year treasuries at 4.3%. German Bund is at 10-year highs at the moment. Same thing in England. Lots of economic indicators are actually signaling a red flag. What do you see as what would be the impact now on the energy transition in your mind? Because I think capital in this sense is central to everything that we're talking about at the moment. And it looks like capital prices, the cost is going up much higher.
Maybe, Nicolas, it's your time.
Thanks, for that. No, I'll try to get back on that. So just so you know from what place I'm speaking of. So I'm running a PE firm dedicated to energy transition, and the core focus we have is energy efficiency and energy flexibility, meaning that in our view, flexibility will be the major issue facing energy system, not just power, the energy systems coming in the next 10 to 20 years. I make 3 points, and I'll try to draw a few, certainly not conclusions, but ideas to go forward. First, I think one thing that strikes me compared to 3 years ago is the energy trilemma isn't dead. And there was some sort of view after COVID that energy trilemma was dead, that renewable was solving everything, affordability, sustainability, and energy security. And I think that was a grave mistake, and now we are seeing the results of that. I think sustainability, and unfortunately, to your point, I think 1.5 is way off course. Way off course. There's no question here. Affordability, I'll come back on this, but in general, I think there are regions where energy transition is by nature inflationary, and in other places it might not be, but this is a challenge. And on energy security, I think it's the current driving force. And so that's my second point is, I'll take here a European, because I would not dare speak of another standpoint. I'm a European. It's probably the place I know best, especially since my new role as a PE firm, not as a former NG guy. But I think there was a misconception on European energy security. We need to look, energy is a physical matter. We need to look at physical realities. Let's take oil and gas. Production of oil and gas in Europe, the two main powers in that front, the UK and Norway. The Crimean curve in the UK is more than flat. It's probably decreasing. I think it's 7% every year decreasing of production. Norway is also flattening. And one of the good, and I'm speaking under the control of Total here, TotalEnergies, sorry. I think most of the big majors have left Stavanger. I think you still have an office over there, but I know Shell has left, BP has left. So it means, it says something about what's happening there. Then if you turn to, you could say, yeah, okay, but renewable energy, all good and fine. Average load factor in Europe for wind is 25%. For solar, it's 12%. US, 35% average load factor for wind energy, and it's around 17 to 18% for solar. It is a total different ballpark. Plus, you could add that we don't have the land mass compared to the US, where of course you could spread solar panels all across Nevada or I don't know, Arizona or whatever it is, and you would then, of course, you need the network. I'll come back to that. And so I will state something, because I've heard that for a number of years since the horrendous invasion of Ukraine by the Putin regime. Russian gas was indeed a rational option for Europe. There's no question here, and we were not naive about the fact that there was an interdependency. But of course, it was one of the cheapest way to achieve energy in Europe. And I think here I'm just trying to do a little bit of perspective. It is super important for Europe to think of the post-Putin era. There's no way we can work with Putin and its clique right now. No way. But we need to think of how we work with Russia as Europeans post-Putin. Because it will, if gas is a vector for energy transition, and I do believe it is, I do not see how Europe can turn its back on Russian gas. And of course, I'm reaffirming that it is impossible to consider in a situation where Putin is in power. I will just make a short comment from your point, Igor, on Chinese overcapacity. I can understand you say it's not really a matter to us. I think the magnitude of the overcapacity should be a concern to everyone. Just to give an idea, there's last year, 2023, there was 583 gigawatts of installed capacity of solar in the world. Chinese manufacturing capability of solar panels is 1.1 terawatt capacity. So almost double, exactly double that amount. This creates a huge matter. First, no PV manufacturer in China is cash generating, none of them. And I think it's also a very strong signal of how the Chinese are behaving. They're doing land grab, and once the land grab is done, it's very hard to get away from that. So I understand your point, but the magnitude is, in my view, very preoccupying.
Long term, no question. But that's supposed to Putin, so.
Understood.
Even with Putin, I heard this morning Hubert Védrine saying, as an assumption, that on a negotiation between Trump and Putin, the sanction could be ended. And in that case, the question of importing Russian gas again in Europe.
Not that easy.
Huh?
It's not that easy. Need the
Igor,
negotiations.
Yeah.
please put your
No,
But it's not impossible.
no, it's not impossible, but that's not that easy.
I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying that it's a possibility.
Yeah.
You never know.
The third point is really a question is, are we really moving away from, the extractive paradigm? And I would argue that we're not, unless we are really serious about recycling. If you look at the reality of energy transition, it's basically another extractive play, just in different matter. Practically, the evaluation from the National Mining Association, so the American Mining Association, but that looks at the world, is between now and 2040, we need 6 times the amount of minerals than what we are currently using. So basically, when we're talking about energy transition, if we don't recycle the solar panels, if we don't recycle the batteries, it's not CO2 put in the air, it's just environmental extraction and environmental devastation that is just, it's another way of externality. And yes, investment amount are colossal. Just to give you an idea, between a CCGT is about 3,500 tons of steel, which is huge. But a 3 megawatt wind turbine is 330 tons of steel, around 5 tons of copper, 2 tons of rare earth materials, and 1,200 tons of concrete. So basically, to get to the same amount of steel, this is not even a tenth of the power that you have with the CCGT. Again, let's be clear. I am absolutely in favor of renewables, but this is the hard, true fact in terms of physical reality. Now, what does it entail is, one, massive investments are needed. This massive investment, again, will be inflationary, and I dare to say in Europe it is for certain, for one reason. We're not answering to a growing need in energy. We are trying to replace an existing system that works. The problem is you can't take out the CCGTs or the coal plants, so you're just piling investment over investment. So we need to stop saying to the Europeans that energy transition will be deflationary. This is false for the next 20 years. So we need to find ways to protect the most vulnerable, and we need to find ways to balance between public and private so that we remain both competitive and people are not just getting out in the street to protest against energy transition. If this happens against social cohesion, we will fail. This is for certain. The other element I would like to stress out is that I think we're moving away from a economics of production to an economics of logistics. And I totally agreed, and you mentioned also, Jeff, smart grids, and Marc-Antoine, you mentioned the massive underinvestment in grids. And I think it's not only grids. Yesterday there was a discussion on hydrogen, etc. The real issue of hydrogen is not the production, even green production. The real issue is transportation and storage. And frankly, if you are a big consumer of hydrogen, yes, you get the right price from the Air Liquides, the Linde, and the Air Products of the world. But if you're a smaller player, the share that transportation and storage takes on your cost delivered, I was going to say delivered ex-ship, but it's not ex-ship, but delivered to your plant, it's just horrendous. You get 7 to 9 euro a kilo if you are Total in a refinery delivered by Air Liquide. But if you're a smaller company, the price can go up to 50 kilo.
Is that a technology problem, or is?
It is both a technology problem in the sense that the compression, you need probably to get to even more than 1,000 bar, and this is an issue, probably. But it's also, I think, a sort of oligopoly issue, frankly. And so I think, in general, we will be in a situation where logistics take a much bigger role in the overall value chain. So what can we do? I think first we need, and I think Pierre Jacquet said it yesterday, we need to better integrate externalities in our economic system, in our models. And I've been hearing this for 25 years when I started my career. And I don't think we've progressed one bit, save on two things. One, we've progressed on CO2 emissions through EU ETS, and there are initiatives in China, there are initiatives in the US, there are initiatives in a number of countries. This is going in the right direction, but we need a global carbon market. This is absolutely critical. Second, I think we need to recognize also the cost. There is a study that fell, I think, two weeks ago. Cost for the insurance market for climate change-related disaster in 2024, $600 billion. That is a cost of externality.
Nicolas, I'll just interrupt you because Majdi wants to
Sure.
say something.
No, thank you. No, I wanted to agree with you. I mean, costs are very, very, very important. It's the elephant in the room with grids, with all the money that we're going to need, and we have to say it. We're going to need a lot of money. At the same time, when we look at the US, you're right also, the US have it all. They have the oil, they have the gas, they have the sun, they have the wind, they have the land, they have the money, they have the knowledge, and they also have the way of doing things, which means, I'm thinking about the IRA, which means they're fostering a system that works when in Europe, even if we need a lot of money, we're doing it with over-regulation, which is one of the problems. We're saying, you need to do this, you need to do that. We're not fixing objectives, saying you need to decarbonize, and we leave to the business the best way to do it. We're telling them which method they should use for SAF, for e-fuels, and this is not the good way to do it. So of course we need a lot of money. We need a carbon market. We need lots of things, but we need also not to have too many regulation and over-regulation.
I was actually coming to that. I fully agree. And at the same time, let's look at the US, and I'm speaking under the control of my neighbor to the left, but the US do have a fairly extensive regulation. And we're talking about American content, the BABA regulation, which makes it impossible to be eligible to the Investment and Jobs Act or even to the IRA. I think what the European have been massively naive is to say, oh, we're going to abide by WTO rules. Who are we kidding ourselves? And so I think we need to, first, I totally agree with you, regulations should be technology agnostic, and stop saying you go to hydrogen this way and you take that technology. I think this is absolutely a catastrophe. But at the same time, we need to create a market. To create a market, we need to say there needs to be European content in some key technologies. And I think just to finish off, and I'll stop there, but I think it's also, and I like your point on the US, I think there's also a moment of truth to European investors. The US have an appetite for risk, and we don't. I mean, let's be clear, we don't. I think the European have thrived on the fact that there were fat returns coming from capital recycling in the early days of renewables. You were developing projects that, let's say, 14% IRRs. You were recycling them at 6% IRRs. And of course, you were making huge amount of money. And people were saying, this is energy transition. No, this is the easy part of the energy transition. That will be my final point. The hard part is coming. And the hard part, in my view, is very industrial. We will need to take risks. I think it goes back to the issue of logistics and grids. To take an example, who is going to take the risk to invest in dynamic line ratings, in power flow controllers, in power electronics, in GaN-based power electronics, etc.? When you talk to investors, to institutional investors, they understand batteries, and you could say, do they really understand the risk behind dispatching a battery? I'm not sure. But they understand renewables, stable, nice, When you come to these issues, they fly away in Europe, which I don't think they do in the US. And so there's a moment of truth where I say, as institutional investors, if you are serious about financing the energy transition, you cannot expect the same type of returns as what you've seen in the past. It will not be the same type of returns as oil and gas. We will not achieve 35% IRR, let's be clear. But I think it's what we need to do. And the reason why we need to do that is because the true cost of energy is not taken into account today. And this is where we need to head.
If I may just add on this last point, what we believe is that with this system, I try to explain integrated power, we really think that we can have a profit of 12%. It's not 25, it's not 30, 12%, which is basically what we will have with a barrel at $60. So it's not that bad. It's possible to do it, and we have to do it. Otherwise, people won't invest in renewables and in electricity and decarbonized way of producing electricity.
Arash, I leave you the floor.
Yeah, actually, Nicolas made my point. I was going to talk about the metal intensity of renewables. But also regarding the profits, especially in the infrastructure, the grids, and so on. Europe is very peculiar in the sense that, much of the industry, at least, for instance, in Germany, is quasi-semi-nationalized already. Many of these grids are regulated assets, so the profits are capped at 6-7% maximum. So there is no real incentive, and it's not inflation adjusted. So there are some issues, like structural issues with that.
Majdi? Yeah, Majdi?
No, you're right. We have to have more and more deregulated market if we want the development of renewables.
Nicolas?
But at the same time, if you look at the state, if you look at what they call the relief load hours, you compare that in Europe to the US, it's much higher in the US, and I think this is one of the main weakness of the US energy system. It's really the grids. You're right, but at the same time, there was an incentive to invest in European grids. Where there were no incentives was to be more and more efficient and to develop technologies that would enable to that would enable to accommodate for the new reality of the energy system, which is more distributed and more intermittent. And I think here there's one thing we didn't touch upon is demand. We are talking about flexibility on the production side and the generation side, but there is no way we achieve that energy transition without flexibility on the demand side. And the link between the two is actually the grid. And what I think we should, I'm not sure we should deregulate, frankly, the grid. I think we should incentivize the grid to invest quicker in solutions that enable the grid to be more responsive. This is not happening in Europe right now, but I think if we deregulate the grid, I am not sure it will channel the money efficiently to account for externalities, because in general, market forces are not super good to account for externalities.
Monsieur Chalmin?
I wanted just to come back. You said we have to move away from the extractive world. We have to recycle. I think you're a bit dreaming. You'll probably recycle, for example, all the metals in the batteries, etc. Yes. But there is one product which they have in Zambia, for example, which is copper. And the copper, you will recycle copper inside an EV, for example, without any problem. But copper is used much in power transport and so on. The time life of copper is very, very long. So we'll still need extractive industries. And the Ethiopians, that's exactly the same people who are asking to have more and more energy transition, and we at the same time are fighting against any mine in the world. Christophe Poinceau could probably add to that, but it's clear that we need, unfortunately, we need more mines.
Maybe Tomás, you're coming from Argentina, you have a lot of lithium. Maybe you want to say something on that.
No, interesting, Nicolas, on recycling. I work with some Chinese clients that are extracting lithium, right, in Argentina. And what they mention is that after 10, 15 years of that battery usage, they expect to recycle that. And so they estimate the forecast of lithium production in the world will eventually drop because of the recycling. So that's just a story to tell you. But maybe I really like your idea of extractive paradigm. In fact, I live in a country in which, of course, we extract oil and gas, but we are now extracting a lot of lithium and copper for the energy transition. And the lithium rush we've seen with the prices of $80,000 a ton, it's amazing. And in spite of the tremendous drop in price, given that Argentina and Chile and Bolivia have brine extraction rather than rock as Australia, the production costs are around $8,000 a ton. So they can cope with these international prices. And Argentina is about, historically, I'm talking historically, about 8 years ago, only Chinese, some Americans, Livent, and some Australians. But now you can see the big ones. Rio Tinto has just announced a $2 billion investment and to produce 70,000 tons a year of lithium. That would place Argentina as the first producer of lithium in the world. Again, to be seen probably in 5 years from now, but interesting. Yeah.
May I fly the flag? Eramet, French company,
yes,
has
Eramet.
just opened
Correct.
something in, and at $10,000 per ton, they are not losing money. They don't seem to lose money.
But interesting, yeah. In fact, Eramet was a joint venture with Tsingshan. Tsingshan, they are metal producers in China, But interesting. They work on a technology, direct lithium extraction, that at least you can see that it's not fully tested yet, So that adds some uncertainty into the industry.
So
Yeah, maybe two additional points regarding the topic of mining and extractive industry. First one, to say that I'm back to the comparison or the evolution of the extraction. Roughly, the metals we are extracting right now from the ground is in the range of 2% of the overall materials we are taking from the ground. So even if it's going to increase, because we are developing renewables energy and so on, if we reduce at the same time the fossil fuels, we may have something which is more or less equilibrated all over time. And you have also to consider that these metals are used to build an infrastructure, not to be consumed as we do with the fossil fuels. Second point regarding the recycling, for sure it's very important, but it will never meet our demand, at least for the next maybe at least decades, maybe much more. I mean, what we are extracting, what we are recycling right now, it's what we produce some decades ago, and it's not the same amount of materials, it's not the same types of metals, and just take the battery as an example. If you recycle the battery we are building right now, so you will get lithium, cobalt, nickel. I'm not sure that we will need these materials in 20 or 30 years from now, because as you may know, the technologies of batteries evolving very fast. So we have a kind of discrepancy between what you can get from the recycling and what you need. And whatever you do, you will always need some extraction of new metals, even if we have to try to reduce as much as possible.
Jeffrey, yes.
I just want to, I think, look, we've got to, I agree that recycling has got to be an important part of the solution here, but it's not going to be the only element of the solution because the need is so great. And it's interesting because in the U.S., even though there was this policy under the Biden administration to push for renewable energy and transition, the IRA was the hallmark of that policy initiative. There was a resistance to allowing copper mines to be developed. There's a Rio Tinto project, joint Rio Tinto BHP project that's been blocked for years, and I think you're right. There's a tension here. At the end of the day, we're going to need more copper, more nickel. I think we're going to be okay on lithium. I think there's going to be an oversupply. I think one of the reasons we're seeing the price be where it's at is there's probably going to be an oversupply of lithium in the market for some foreseeable future. But I think copper, in particular, there's going to be a great need for. One issue is that there's a permitting issue in places, including places like Chile, where copper is abundant and it's essential to the economy. There's resistance to allowing new mines to be developed because there is this tension between the environmental impact of new mines, but there's this cost to it, which is we're not going to produce enough copper for battery production and other uses in energy. The other problem, though, that you highlight is that these projects are long-term projects, and so part of the problem is that if they're delayed. So, for example, right now I think a number of nickel projects around the world are suspended. And in large part that's because there's a lot of uncertainty about the development of the electric vehicle market in the US, the growth prospects for China. And so the problem with delaying these projects is that by the time the electric vehicle market starts to develop in the US, you're suddenly not going to have enough nickel to supply for the battery chain, and we're going to have this issue where suddenly nickel prices will shoot up and there will be an absence of supply. So that's one of the issues that people are going to have to start to think about a solution to.
If I may, on nickel prices, I don't agree with you. It won't shoot up and for many, many years. And we would love nickel price to shoot up for New Caledonia, where we have some political problems. But you have a country called Indonesia. And Indonesia, with Chinese capital, has gone from producing 10% to 50% of nickel production. And the market is in overcapacity for years. When nickel, and I think Christophe was right, will we need nickel in batteries in 20 years? you still need nickel to make stainless steel. That's the main thing. So nickel is not a problem. The big problem is copper, and to my knowledge, one of the biggest copper potential project is in the States, where it is unfortunately on the land of some Indian, how do you say, reserves. So
That's the Rio Tinto BHP project.
yeah. Perhaps Donald Trump will allow it, but I don't know. But that's part of the problem. Any kind of mines in the world, you will have always problems. And I must say, when you look at the mining developments the mining and industrial development of nickel in Indonesia, it's not exactly, it's not perfect.